Okay, hello everyone. I'm Roger Royce. I'm a partner with Haynes Boone. We're a law firm, an AmLaw 100 law firm. I practice in Palo Alto, California. I do emerging growth and venture capital. And today's presentation for Idea to IPO is how to get venture and angel funding for your tech startup. It is the last day of February of 2024, and there's a lot going on in the market. For today, I'm going to do a 1-hour presentation, and I'm going to take questions. Might even answer a few, so you could always hope. But if you do have questions, put them in the Q&A box, okay? Use the chat box for stuff that I need to see right now, like you can't hear me, or I need to comb my hair or something like that. But if you've got a substantive question, put that in the Q&A box, and I will get to it after the end of the hour. Again, put your information in the chat. And in fact, I am going to do that. I'm going to give you my LinkedIn address, my contact information, my YouTube channel, and my podcast. I have a monthly podcast called 10,000 Startups, where we talk about legal issues of interest to startup companies. And it's only 20, 30 minutes. It's the best 20, 30 minutes you're going to spend on a Monday morning if you're interested in this topic. So, subscribe to that if you'd like, or hit the YouTube channel. Now, we are recording. I do have slides. I do have a book. If you were lucky enough to register for this, you are going to get a copy of the recording, a copy of the slides, and a digital copy of the book. And if any of you have follow-up questions, my door is always open. Please email me and, holler if you're nearby. All right, now we come to what is always the most interesting part of the presentation. That is the dreaded share screen. And okay. All right, somebody chat me. What are you looking at? You should see my screen. How to get venture and angel funding for your tech startup. All right, so first, let's talk a little bit about market issues. Let's do it this way then. There we go. And I want to tell you what 2023 looked like for those of you who might not know. So 2023 was not a great year. Let me put it that way, especially for those of us who went through 2021. 2021 was just off the charts. I mean, just look at this. Of course, we were just coming off COVID. So, put this in context. We're just coming off COVID, but look at those numbers. Holy cow, right? 2021, 2022, it's like, uh-oh. And 2023, look at that cliff. So it was a big cliff up and a big cliff down. These numbers are from PitchBook, by the way, and I'm going to give you their conclusions in a minute. And then I'm going to talk about what we think is going to happen in 2024, because after all, it is February, so, the crystal balls are out. But 2023 was a bad year. There's just no sugarcoating it, no way around it. It was a tough year for money. All right. Exits were down in 2023, another cliff. Not a lot for a lawyer like me to do in 2023. But again, we had a big high back in 2021. I mean, there was pent-up demand from everybody being locked up from COVID. I guess one interesting data point and one good thing is that women founders were doing a little bit, women-owned companies were doing a little bit better than the average over the last couple of years. It was still down, but according to Fortune, women founders were getting more money than pre-COVID levels and more in 2023 than 2022. Anecdotally, I didn't quite see it, but that is what the data says. So there you go. That was 2023. So PitchBook concludes from this that deals, fundraising, exit activity, deal values, all down. All right, it's what you'd call a bad year. However, the VC industry is well capitalized. I'm going to get into that a little bit. You keep hearing this term dry powder. What is dry powder? Well, that means money is sitting in a bank someplace ready to invest. And there are some sectors that are attracting a lot of attention, notably artificial intelligence. Um, Similarly, notably, life sciences and biotech and clean tech. They're attracting significant levels of public and private investment. That's PitchBook. Okay, now I'm going to do something else that you should not try at home. I'm going to share a different screen because I want to show you something else. All right, you should be looking at the Silicon Valley SVB. Yay. The SVB report, which you'll notice it's dated 2024. I just got this the other day, and you saw what 2023 was like. Well, what's 2024 going to be like? Well, what does SVB think? We'll take a look at this. Here's what we think for 2024. VC fundraising in 2023 was, this is the amount of money that the VCs themselves have raised, 53 billion in 2023. Their prediction based on what data we have now is they're going to raise a little less money. Fewer funds are going to return to market, is how they say it. 53 down to 50 billion. Okay, that's not good, but we understand that, right? I mean, if you're making tons of money, if you're making a lot in the stock market because you bought NVIDIA, or if you're making a lot in treasuries or bonds because interest rates are high, it makes it a little more competitive out there in the fundraising environment. So I can understand VC fundraising, the expectation that's going to go down. But that's not really our problem, is it? Our problem isn't, unless you're a VC raising money, our problem is getting money from the VCs. So that's the next one, especially if you're early stage. US tech deals 2023, they predicted 1,250. It was actually 1,300 Series A deals in tech. And they expect 2024 to have an uptick to 1,500. Okay, that's good news. It's a good sign. If you're looking for Series A, it'll be slightly easier this year than it was last year. Late stage, they're expecting that relative to the peak to be less than it was. And tech IPOs, I don't know if anybody's expecting that, but they're expecting a pretty big uptick in tech IPOs. Okay, we'll see. Now, these are indicators that people are still kind of pessimistic, even though the job numbers are good. But let me go down here. I mean, just look at this chart. I mean, this is just the nature of angel and venture investment. My God, it looks like my blood sugar numbers. It's just all over the place, right? Up, down. And look at their predictions. They're predicting an upward trend. Zoom in. Good idea. I would if I could. So let me just tell you what it says, because we're going to leave this in a second. VC fundraising, 6-year low. We already talked about that. Lots of dry powder. And in terms of investment, where is it? Down rounds have jumped. I think we're going to see more of that. Valuations are still rising, definitely. But the big number down here is what the expectation is for exits. And I think, everybody I talk to is that, like, yeah, startups, revenue benchmarks are down. Startups are cutting their net burn. That's great, but you can't cut your net burn forever. So I just think we're going to see exits this year because, startups need cash. When we're out of cash, they got to sell. Now, here's the other interesting thing about it is SVB, for sure, is really big on AI, artificial intelligence. And look at the numbers. AI investment is high but not peaking, is what this says. A once-in-a-decade cycle, high but not peaking. VCs are embracing AI, percentage of closed funds with AI as a focus. So that's going to be a big sector in 2024, just the whole AI sector. And you can go ahead and you can download this report from SVB. They're not hiding it. It's online. And you might look at it yourself if you want to see what the environment's like. But for our purposes, I'm going to go back to my slide because we're going to talk about how to access that money now. righty. Give me a second here. All right, are we back on my slides? Sources of funding, somebody chat me. Let me know that I'm doing this right. Well, I'll assume that I am. So let's walk through some of the different sources of funding that we might look at. So first, let's, before we get to angel and VC, I kind of want to take a big step back. All right, sources of funding, non-venture capital. And I'm going to start with just some universal basic principles that people should understand before we get into this space at all. So number one, and I know some of this sounds axiomatic and obvious and intuitive, etc., but it seems not to be oftentimes, so it's worth talking about. Let's level set. Number one, your investors are your partners. Okay, you have to think of them as your partners. There never was a day when you take money from people and then they just disappear and you never have to worry about them again. And different investors are going to be, have varying degrees of oversight and activity and being involved in your company. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but let's start off with the first fundamental assumption that if you're going to take money, outside money, you're taking on a partner. Okay. Secondly, and this is important, get it into your head immediately or as soon as possible. I think it's a good idea that financing should be staged. In other words, you don't want to take all the money you can possibly take if right from the start. What you want to take is enough money to get you to the next valuation metric. And that means that you really have to get your crystal ball out and do a little forecasting and predicting and figure out, what do I think I need? How much money do I need to get to the milestone, accomplish what I need to have that valuation uptick? Is it an FDA approval? Is it a product launch? Is it scale? Is it whatever it is, whatever that metric is? And you take enough money to get you to that point. And out here in the real world, you go tell the VC, this is what I need to get to that point, and then they slash that number and you get there on a lot less. But nevertheless, you get the idea. That's the concept. And then you raise more money when you get to that point. If you raise it all early, you're doing it at a lower valuation, you're giving up too much to your company. So there really does have to be some strategy and planning in this. Thirdly, funding is going to dilute you. Just get used to the idea. From time to time, unless it's revenue or it's government grants, something like that, it's going to be dilutive. And I do have people come in and say, oh, I'm going to raise money and I'm going to maintain X%. Well, no, you're not. That's just not how this game works. You're going to have a smaller piece of a bigger pie as you go forward. And the bigger the pie, the smaller your piece. And you can try to hardwire this all you want with, I always have at least X%. That never works. That's going to go away. Your investors are going to, the only time I do see that is when you have, especially some of the incubators and accelerators are taking non-dilution warrants, but even those phase out fairly quickly. So just keep that in mind. You're going to end up with a fairly small percentage and you're going to lose control. That usually happens by Series B, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And here's a big one. Your valuation, it might have very little to do with what you're worth. And I think people kind of get hung, because of the word valuation, you get hung up on the idea that that's my value. That is what I'm worth. And, I happen to think quite highly of myself, so I think I'm worth a lot. That's not the way the investor is looking at it. For the investor, the valuation is much more of a mathematical calculation. And the easiest, simplest way I think I can describe it is the investor knows what percent of the company they need at this stage. And we all know how much money you need in this round to get you to that next valuation point. Well, with those two variables, poof, you've got a valuation. Now, I know there's other ways of doing it. I can identify, in fact, one day I sat down and I identified about 30 different valuation methods that I've actually seen used, or I've heard of being used rather, out there in the market. But ultimately, the valuation is simply a financial metric. And I don't get too hung up on it And the reason why is because from financing to exit is usually a long time. And there's usually multiple points to revalue that company, to reshape that reshuffle that economic deck and reshape the deal. Speaking of valuation, I don't think valuation is your biggest issue most of the time. Certainly it's an important issue, don't get me wrong, but it's often not your biggest issue because typical investments, you think of it in two ways: economics and control. And depending who your investor is, you might be awfully concerned about that control component. We have this game here in the Valley we call Fire the Founder. If you're super concerned about that, and I have founders that come and they are, then, be careful about that. Be careful who your partners are, because they're going to have that right at some point. And secondly, you got to read the fine print. And that's what you need lawyers like me for, because you can have a big valuation but you may end up working for the investors because of their preferences, their liquidation preferences, their anti-dilution protection, their pro rata rights, their redemption rights, whatever it is. And I've seen plenty of companies over the last 30 years in this Valley where the founders and the option holders and everybody else, there's no way they're going to clear those preferred stock hurdles. They are working for the VCs and they don't even know it. So let's not get too hung up on valuation. Let's think about terms. And I could tell you story after story. Don't take it from me, just read it in my book, 10,000 Startups. I talk about that and I give you real world examples. I give you even more in my book, Dead on Arrival, how to avoid the legal mistakes that could kill your startup. So you really have, and these are the days of do-it-yourself law. It's kind of do-it-yourself everything because you can go online. It's just so easy, right? Well, be careful about that. There is something to said for experience and having seen people get ripped off throughout the years. Avoid early mistakes. Again, just be careful. An early mistake, most early mistakes are free. We can fix those. Some early mistakes are just company killers. So you're taking a risk every time you do something without advice. Take cheap money over expensive money. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, I am very pro VC. Some of my best friends are VCs. Well, I wouldn't go that far. If I had any friends, they would be VCs. Let me put it that way. So I am not anti-VC. What I am telling you, though, is that venture capital money is expensive because you are giving up equity. You are giving up equity. And it's even more expensive sometimes, angel money. How can that be? Well, you're giving up equity at a very low valuation. So just understand what you're getting into now. With a typical startup that I work with, that's your only option. It's high risk, but it's high return, right? And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute here. But those are your typical metrics. You are swinging for the fences. You're going to come up with, the AI that's going to save the world, or the therapy that's going to cure a disease, or something like that. You're going to be the next, the next exchange that's going to democratize crypto or whatever it is. So these are big ideas. These are huge ideas oftentimes. They're change the world ideas. And even when they're not, they're risky, but they have big market potential. But big return, big risk. Okay, and that's what VCs and angels invest in. If it weren't like that, you would not even be talking to those people. You wouldn't even be listening to this. You'd be down at the bank, signing for a loan. All right. Common stock is for service providers. I guess we're getting a little into the weeds here now, but because it's so easy to go online and download forms, I just want to be clear that you typically do not want to sell common stock to investors. You want to sell them something else: preferred stock, convertible notes, safes, whatever it is. Keep your common for your service providers. I'll tell you why in a minute. Now we're really in the weeds. Get a data room. These are the days of miracle and wonder, and you can put everything in a data room and have everything up there in the cloud where everybody can see everything in real time, all the time. We don't have dueling spreadsheets anymore. We don't have dueling Excel spreadsheets. We don't have, rooms full of paper documents that always get lost, it seems. You know, we just put everything in a data room, and the earlier you start doing that, the better off you're going to be. And do the cleanup ahead of time, right? Like I say, mistakes are free early on. They're going to cost you if a VC or an angel or an investor has to tell you that there's something wrong with your company that has to be fixed before you'll get their money. And that could be valuation points, or it could be you lose the deal. All right, we're still on the step back phase. Sources of funding. As a founder, you know, you're going to be expected to put a little bit of money into your company. You're going to expect it to have some skin in the game, to take a little risk, right? But this is delicate, because I will never in a million years advise a founder to go take a mortgage on their house to finance their company. I think it's just too risky. The kind of companies I deal with, it's high return, but it's high risk. Don't do that. Don't cash out your IRA. Don't cash out your 401k. Well, maybe your IRA, if you can figure out how to do it. Maybe a little credit card debt, but don't gamble any more than you can afford to lose. I think that's the message here. But you have to have something in the deal, right? I think your angels are going to want to know. And in fact, the way it was expressed to me by one of my investor clients is, I want to know they got enough money in this deal so that they're not a tourist, they're not a hobbyist, they're committed, they're not going to walk away. On the other hand, I want to know that they don't have so much money in this deal that they'll do something crazy, right? That those, you know, Sam Bankman-Fried me or something like that. So it's delicate, a little bit of money, but not a tremendous amount of money. Debt financing. If you can get it, that's great. Even in a high interest rate environment like where we are now, that's still going to be the cheapest money you're going to be able to access. But let's pause on debt financing. Let me jump ahead a little. The problem with that is to obtain debt. I mean, these days it's complicated, but most banks are going to look for income-based lending as opposed to asset-based lending. That's a change that's happened over the years. And if you're a startup company, you probably don't have a lot of income. If you do have a lot of income, you're probably not in the right place right now, listening to the right person, because my companies, they don't want net income. Revenue, we want revenue, but we want to be reinvesting and growing. So we're not sitting there with a lot of extra cash flow. That's why we need investors. And if you don't have cash flow, you can't service debt. So you're probably not a candidate for debt financing. If you are, that's great. And if you are one of those rare companies that can borrow money and take venture, that's awesome. But I want to talk to what typically happens here in the real world. And typically, if you can borrow money, you don't want to be anywhere near a VC. And if you got the VCs hovering over you, you probably are not a candidate for debt. Now, there is a category in the middle called venture debt. We might get to that slide yet. And that's for those people that are in that category that have lienable assets, intellectual property. I'm doing one of those deals right now today, in fact. And if you're in that category, honestly, that's a different kettle of fish. And maybe we'll get to that. Government grants, if you can get it, go for it. It's complicated, I'll warn you, and it takes a lot of work. And usually you have to have a matching investor. But I am working with companies now that have raised millions of dollars of government grants, because what they have appeals to it. It's a good technology. It's a save the world technology. It matches whatever the policy of the day is, or it really is something that the government has an interest in funding. Friends and family, that's where you're going to go first. After that first, $2,500 that you put in a company to get incorporated, now you go out to your friends and family and have that conversation at the Thanksgiving table with your well-off uncle. This is great because these are the people that are going to share your unbridled optimism and believe in you, even though all you've got is a beta and you might not even have that. They don't need to see traction. They don't need to see customers, revenue, evidence of that. If you got a pitch deck, that's great. But those are the first people you go to, the people that are just going to gamble on you because. Friends and family, they're going to be small numbers. Don't expect to raise a lot of money in friends and family unless you got richer friends than I do, or more generous family than me. So, plan on getting, 25 grand a pop, 10 grand a pop from your friends and family. That gets you going. That gets you to beta, right? Now you go out to the angels and seed investors. And the trouble is that that term angel, which means a wealthy, what used to mean a wealthy individual, high net worth individual who likes to invest in startup companies. And the definition of angel these days is so broad that it kind of covers a broad swath of different investment appetite. To give you an example, it used to be the conventional wisdom was the angel is the person that doesn't need to see traction, they need to see a beta, and before that, it wasn't even that, it was just a PowerPoint. Okay, but I'll tell you here where I practice in Palo Alto, angels are pretty spoiled. They got the pick of the litter. They see lots of good deals every day. And traction would be really nice. What do I mean by traction? Somebody bought your product. They paid you for your product. They will pay you for this, right? So if you got that, that makes you that much more attractive to an angel. It also increases your valuation, making you that much less attractive. So I know it sounds like there's some dissonance in what I'm saying, or some discord, but the answer is they're both right. Some angels, they want to be in at the lowest valuation possible, meaning that you are at the earliest stage possible. And other angels are like, my risk appetite is I kind of like to see you have a little bit further than that. I'm going to act more like a VC and ask for traction. And that's what I mean by seed investors. Seed is the early money in. And again, that is a broad category. It can go up to millions of dollars a seed, depending on your company and your market. So this is all very fact specific, and I'm giving you kind of general guidelines to think about as we tailor a specific strategy for your company. Incubators, some of them will actually give you money. They'll take an arm and a leg for it. Just be prepared for that, hopefully. And not all incubators are created equally. Some are going to do you a hell of a lot of good and are going to work hard for you. Others, not as much. Pitch competitions. My good friend KC over at Pitch Global runs a pitch competition that is a really good example of where you can get in front of lots of other and different investors, and they can see your company, and you might not have exposure to them otherwise. And again, they're not all created equal. Some are better than others, but it is certainly a way to go. Institutional, VC or private equity. We're going to talk about that. Now we're in the big leagues, right? Now we're talking to VCs, institutions, people that are really going to grill you. They're going to hold you to a higher standard. We're going to get to that. And then finally, don't forget about alternative financing. And by alternative, we don't hear much about rewards-based crowdfunding anymore. I don't know why. I mean, if you can go on and get people to just give you money online, why would you not do that? I know there's some tax and revenue issues around that, but crowdfunding, that is non-dilutive financing. What we hear more about is crowdfinancing. And it's been 11, 12 years now since the Jobs Act, which provides that you can go onto an online portal, raise small amounts of money from lots and lots of people. You can get up to $5 million that way. This is a really good option for a lot of companies. If you have, for example, a consumer-facing company that people sort of get, they see that. I'd love to give you an example, but I can't without betraying client confidences. Think about, let's say you have a tech that is easy to understand what the problem is that you're solving. By the way, here in Silicon Valley, we always say that pain points, we're solving pain points. Where's the pain and what's the solution? Let's suppose you have a pain that everybody understands. It's wintertime, so my car is cold in the morning. That's my pain point. Oh, well, I got a technology that'll warm your car up before you even get into it. Okay, there's a pain point. There's a solution. We all understand that. Okay, that might be a good prospect for crowd financing. I don't know why I thought of that stupid example. I don't know anybody doing that. I just remember I got my car this morning and it's like kind of cold out today. So anyway, something that the consumers will understand, because that's going to be your investors. And it's small amounts of money from a lot of people. It's relatively expensive. The transaction costs are high, But there was a time when you wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole because it just messes up your cap table and the VCs are going to hate it, yada, yada. Well, that's not true anymore. We've got ways of putting you in an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, of testing the waters, of getting relatively easy securities compliance. So it's something to look into. I am not going to talk about ICOs anymore, coin offerings. In fact, I don't remember what those acronyms stand for. It's been so long since I've done one. But the idea is you sell tokens in your company instead of stock. It was all the rage before COVID. Of course, then the SEC came along and they got their hands involved in it. And now it's, for the most part, in my world, it's offshore. And so I'm not weighing in one way or the other on that. So, no flames, please. I'm not saying bad or good. And then royalty financing. Here's something you probably haven't thought about, right? Shared income or shared equity appreciation loans. And here's the idea. There is a class of angels out there that say, boy, sure like your company, but this idea of sticking around for 10 years until you sell before I get anything, I don't know about that. Maybe they're as old as me and, 10 years is, then we may not have 10 years left. So how about we do this? How about you just sell me a share of income or a share of revenue or a share of some other metric from your company or your product or your income stream? And I'll give you the money now and you give me that share of income for the next several years. That is out there. That's happening. We can do that with companies. It's a real thing. A lot of law firms are just saying, forget about it. We're not touching that. It's got securities issues all over the place. A lot of legal risk. It's unknown. Plus, we're in an environment where sellers of securities, the mantra in selling securities as a legal matter has always been seller beware. But boy, oh boy, never more than now. You do not want to make a mistake. And this is new and novel. So I'm saying that it hasn't quite taken off as much as you might expect, but it is a thing and it does exist. And I have done those deals and it makes sense. It kind of bridges that gap between risk and return. All right. We talked about this. Most startups have to get a little personal savings from their founders to get rolling. These numbers, I'm sure, are probably already outdated. How much? Let's move on. So let's say even at the angel stage, you're going to find your white knight, your what's the right word? You're going to find your lead. That's the word. You're going to find your lead. Somebody that is really going to promote your company, even at the angel stage. They're going to be your cheerleader, your advocate. They're going to put their own money in and then tell all their friends down at the golf course that they should come join them. Well, here's the thing about your lead investor. Look for smart money, not dumb money. What do I mean by that? Smart money is people that know what you're doing. They believe in the mission. They know how you got to where you are. They know where you're going. Look for the smart money. You're just way better off having smart money rather than dumb money, because if things don't turn out that well, the smart money is going to know, okay, I guess I understand. Everybody else is going to say, oh, you told me I'd get rich off your company. What's going on? So don't burn bridges. Smart money if you can. Chemistry, find people to invest. I know it sounds dumb, but you're not just taking their money and never seeing them again. You're going to have to live with these people, right? And I've been in lots of companies which were as contentious as a bad marriage. You got partners, investors that hate founders, and founders that hate investors. And it's a bigger risk now because we're doing everything over Zoom. So you don't get the opportunity to go have a cup of coffee with somebody and see how they treat the waitress. You don't find out that you're dealing with someone like that until you're actually partners. So be careful about chemistry. Commitment. It'd be nice to have a lead that's going to participate in follow-on rounds. You want them to be committed, right? And you want them to work for you if you can. I know that's a luxury, but if you can, that'd be nice to have, because it sends a bad message to the market when your investor won't participate later. or doesn't care about your company. Deep pockets, of course, that helps with those follow-on rounds, and a big network. The best, most successful, most well-loved angels in the Valley are people who have big networks. They're going to find you your next investor. That's awesome. That's critical. That's great. Find those people. How's your network? What are you going to do? Do you know a lot of VCs, right? Are you going to go out and promote me? We talked about debt. We talked about government. By the way, if you do debt, don't just sign whatever the bank gives you. I'll just warn you, because they might, well, first of all, bank documents are going to be, let me put it this way, they're going to be priced commensurate with the terms. So just understand what it is that you're signing. That's all I want to say about that. Government grants, that's a whole other thing. All right. So now we're taking outside money, and we've talked about all the different types. So how much we're going to raise? We talked about this. Milestones, burn rate, target runway, equity percentage. Go Google all of that if you don't know what it means. The basic idea is that you raise enough money to get you to the next valuation point. You figure out your burn rate, that's how much you're spending and how fast. You figure out your runway, how much money do you have to get you to that next milestone. So get your Excel spreadsheet out and start doing numbers. You should be living in numbers land all the time on this. And we talked about equity percentage and valuation. How much is enough to get to next valuation date? Here's where I start. We want to double your value, and we want it to happen within 1 or 2 years. Now, granted, that is aspirational. And in 2023, that didn't happen too often. In 2024, it's going to happen not often, let's be honest. But that's what you're shooting for. That's what you'd like to do. Because a lot more down, I didn't show you the numbers, but there were a lot more down rounds last year than the year before. And a down round is when you raise money at a lower valuation than you did in the previous round. That's a down round. Okay. I valued my company at 10 million in round the first, in the seed, and now I'm valuing it at 5 million in the A. Okay. Those are just made up numbers, but you get the idea. Valuation has decreased. It's not the end of the world. It happens all the time. It is a thing. It's not a good thing, though. You'd rather avoid that, and you can plan into that. So I guess the counterintuitive corollary to that is that you don't take money at too high a valuation. Remember what I said? Valuation is not your biggest issue. You don't take money at too high a valuation if you're going to have to do a down round at the next valuation. That sends a really bad signal to the market. And if you just sit down and do the math, you'll figure out you're going to end up, after you look at the anti-dilution adjustments, you may end up in a worse position. And it would take me an hour to walk through that. So just, at some point, trust me on that. Money not to take. This is as important as money to take. What's your investor's goal, right? I mean, I've been in so many companies where the investor is just got such a completely different idea of where that company is going to go than the founders, and when it's going to go, and what the appropriate exit is and how soon it is. Be kind of nice to know what they're thinking, or at least let them know what you're thinking early on in the process. You want investors who are cooperative and accessible. What do I mean by that? Well, oftentimes, especially once you get into the priced rounds where you're selling stock, and even before that, these days, even at the safe level, investors are taking board seats. Well, you're going to need their cooperation. You're going to need them to sign consents. You're going to need to take board action and show up at the meetings and weigh in on stuff. And even if they're not board members, you'll need shareholder action, right? Because every time that company does something that requires shareholder approval, like another round of financing, you got to go out to the investors. You want them to be cooperative and accessible. And believe you me, I have seen investors who are anything but. And there's two categories. One are the kind that they won't answer their phone or return an email, to save their lives. You're not going to get them to sign anything or read anything or even read what you send to them. That's going to be a problem. I warn you right now. And there's a lot of people like that. And the second are the kinds that are just troublemakers. They're just not cooperative. They're going to criticize every little thing you do. And now, how do you know? How are you going to know? you know what, do your due diligence. You can do that. Who else have they invested in? Google them. Go to Scribd and find out if they've been sued or if they have sued companies. I don't do business with anybody I haven't checked out. You know, I've been there, done that, man. My life's too short for any more difficult people, and your company's is as well. So I'd check out your investors and make sure that they don't have that bad reputation. Control, there are investors who are going to want way too much control for the amount of money they're putting into the company. That's a little fuzzier standard. I can give you some guidelines later because there is a very efficient market for what this should be. But be careful about, the control freak. In fact, I'm going to change that slide and call it control freak from now on. I like that better. And then, of course, terms and valuation, just here's an interesting factoid for you that I've discovered over the years. The bigger, more famous, and more successful the fund here in Silicon Valley, the more, I know people are going to argue with me, but the more transparent they are, right? No tricks. In fact, I don't want to say who, but it was one of the really big funds I did a deal with one time, and they sent me over a term sheet. The thing was only like 1 or 2 pages. And so I, of course, went through and had to figure out where all the tricks were. I couldn't find any. And I called up the VC and I said, let's go through this because, what are you thinking here? Why didn't you say this? What's this? And finally, at one point, he says, look, no tricks. There's no tricks. We like this company. We want to invest. We're not trying to take advantage of anybody. And he was right, So because I've been on the other side of that way too many times when stuff is snuck into that term sheet that's going to bite you. So, look at those terms really carefully. And, you can't not communicate. And just the way terms are presented to you are going to tell you a lot about who you're dealing with. Let's talk about angels or angel groups and angel funds, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like I said, you want the ones that got connections to follow on VC funding. You want the ones that are going to give you good advice. And you want the ones that understand the concept of risk capital. And they know that if they hit a home run 1 in 10 times, they're beating the average. They're doing great. You do not want hostage takers, whiners, and demanders. What do I mean by that? Hostage takers are, hey, you took outside money. You sold me a piece of your soul. You owe me. You have to do what I tell you to do. All right. Be careful of those people. And that's why it's important to go have a cup of coffee with someone. You'll find out in a hurry, well, I think it's a clue. Let me put it that way. Whiners. There are people that they're not going to tell you what to do. They're going to wait till you do it and look for something wrong and someone to blame. As in life generally, I think it's a good idea to avoid those people. Demanders. You're going to find demanders and you'll put up with it for a while. You'll have, believe it or not, I had a guy, demand weekly board meetings. You'll do that for a while and you'll provide statements and flash reports and stuff, but it's going to wear on you. And you got a business to run, right? So be careful of demanders. And then of course, there is the ugly. By the way, did anyone ever see the movie, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly? One of the greatest revenge stories of all time. I love Clint Eastwood. It's an awesome movie. I couldn't quite figure out who in that movie was good, bad, or ugly, but I love the movie. I watched it just the other night again. Anyway, the ugly, potential plaintiffs and disturbers. All right. The potential plaintiffs, again, Google them. We live in a world where there's no excuse for not having information anymore. You can go out and find it. I know a lot of it's misinformation, but you can find facts as well. But the last thing in the world you want is someone who's litigious, because let me just tell you something. You, as the startup company and issuer of securities, are a sitting duck. You're a sitting duck for an investor that doesn't like how things went. You're a sitting duck for an angry, vindictive SEC, which is what we have right now. You're a sitting duck for an IRS that might change policy and decide you shouldn't have had that ERC credit. You're a sitting duck for a lot of potential plaintiffs. Avoid those people. Google them, see who they are, see what they're like. I'm just telling you, it's going to save you a lot of stress. And of course, there are people that just are in your company, you kind of wonder why they even invested. All they want to do is cause trouble. And you'll see what I mean once you run into them. In fact, I've had cases, more than one, where I've seen current investors go talk other people out of investing in the later rounds. It's like, oh, you don't want to invest in this company. It's like, it's irrational, it's crazy, but it's crazy like a fox, because what that oftentimes means is that they can preserve their majority position and force a sale of the company or something like that. So be careful. By the way, I talk a lot more about that in my book if you're interested in my layman's view of the psychology of all that. Okay, what are you going to sell when you talk to your investors? Well, if you're in Silicon Valley or if you're on the East Coast, you're going to sell a safe. Okay, that's a simple agreement for future equity. If you're anywhere else, you're probably going to be talking about a convertible note. All of these documents, these convertible notes and safes, they are essentially, you get the money now and you give them the stock later. That's essentially the idea. Why would you do that? Well, two reasons, a bunch of reasons, but one, it's really hard to value your company now, okay? We don't have metrics. We don't have revenue. We don't have this. We don't have that. Really hard. So how about you give me the money now and we'll value it later when we do have metrics, and we'll give you a discount. And just to keep you safe, we'll put a cap on the maximum value that money is going to convert at. It's going to happen automatically, or I'll give you the option to do it. And if we happen to sell the company in the meantime, we'll cash you out at some multiple. Okay, that's the basic idea. What's the difference between a safe and a convertible note? Two things. Convertible note bears interest, right? And it's usually a pretty high rate of interest. And secondly, there's a regulatory reason, but suffice it to say, they typically have a relatively short term to maturity, meaning they have to be repaid. Oh, does that mean that if I don't repay, the investor can sue me? Yes, that's exactly what that means. Does that mean that they can sue me and maybe take my company away? Yeah, that's what that means. Yeah, and before you say that won't happen, I will tell you that that does happen. So I don't like convertible notes. I like safes if I'm on the company side. And the investors in my community, they understand, look, we're not going to sue companies. I mean, give me a break. You know, we don't care about interest return. The safe is just fine. So there's a lot of details about the safe that we should know. Are we going to get into that? Maybe a little bit. The simple agreement for future equity. What I'd like you to know about simple agreements for future equity is they are not simple and they are not equity. But they are an agreement. I'll give you that. So first of all, what do I mean by that? There are standard templates that you can download online. So they're simple in that sense. You can, they'll get you into trouble. They won't get you out very easily. But those agreements typically, they're one way or the other. And most of them are post money, which is investor friendly. All right, I'm not saying that's bad necessarily, depending on the company and where you are and how close you are to the price round. I am just saying that it can be complicated to go through the numbers and figure it out, especially when you got multiple safes with multiple valuation caps and different kinds of terms, etc. It can be complicated. It can complicate your cap table enough where you don't really know how much of that company you own, and you won't know until all those safes convert. And even then, we're going to have arguments about what we really meant. I've seen some very, very complex, simple agreements, we put it that way, because people can't resist just adding bells and whistles. Lawyers have to change everything we touch. And you'll find that people are adding bells and whistles and become complicated very quickly. And even if they don't, if you've got multiple safes over a long period of time, like I say, at different valuations, it's gonna be a relatively complex mathematical calculation, at least for a non-quant like me to do. Now, fortunately, there are websites online and there are tools and there are platforms that will make this process really easy for you. So they're expensive, but they exist, and think about that. Equity. I do a series of podcasts on safes because they are very pervasive throughout the Valley. And some people, a lot of smart people, say that these are really, in effect, equity. There are people that will give legal opinions to that effect. I am not one of them. Okay, I think it's really a prepaid forward contract for tax purposes. Why am I dwelling on this? Well, first of all, if it were equity, you'd have voting rights, you'd have information rights, you'd have inspection rights, you'd be owed fiduciary duties. So there's the legal aspect. And yes, we can add side letters that contract for that, but you probably won't do that. So it's not equity in my mind as a corporate law matter. But people say, well, who cares about that? What about as a tax matter? Because if it's equity as a tax matter, if it's stock, quote unquote, scare quotes, then that means my holding period starts when I buy the safe. And then I buy a safe today, it converts in 2 years to stock, and I sell it 4 years later. I can qualify for qualified small business tax treatment. And I do a whole series of episodes on this too in my podcast. Well, why is that important? Because that is a full 100% exemption from federal income tax up to $10 million or 10 times cost basis. Wow, that's awesome. You know what? I want that to be equity. Well, a lot of people will take that position for tax purposes. I've never seen it challenged. On the other hand, I've never seen it questioned. I've never seen it held up. I've never seen the IRS rule on it. Just understand there's a big, humongous question mark around that. So, it's just an acronym. It's just a name. Don't put too much weight on it. Pre and post money I want to talk about. A pre-money safe is just like it's like a venture capital deal. It's just like the investor put money into your company at a certain valuation, that valuation being represented in the safe by the concept of a valuation cap. Okay, well, what does that mean? Yeah, that's a lot of words, I know, yada, yada, yada. What does that mean? Give me something I can use. What it means is that when you sell the safe to the next investor, everyone gets diluted, including the first investor. Oh, okay, well, that sounds fair. Well, you'd think so, except the post-money safe is just the opposite. The money goes in, but it's going to convert into a certain percentage of stock at close of your financing. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that means that when you sell safe to that second investor, you, the founders, dilute. That first investor does not. And a similar rule applies for option plan increases. Oh, well, that's bad. Well, maybe it depends. If you're going to sell one safe and then do a priced round, in a couple months, 3 months, 4 months, who cares? Not a big deal. It's a rounding error. But if you're going to do like a lot of my clients do, if you're just going to live on safe money for years and years and sell lots and lots of them, that difference can become significant. So get your spreadsheets out. Let's do some math. Woohoo, pro rata rights. What is that? I got 2 minutes left. Pro rata rights, well, it depends whether you're pre or post money safe, but it's generally the idea of investing in a later round. Sophisticated angels will ask for that. They'll say, look, if your company turns out to be successful, I'm going to feel like an idiot if I didn't ask for the right to put more money in to the company down the road and maintain my percentage interest. So they typically kick in at the round after the Series A, right? So the safe converts into stock. Now you got a percentage, and then they do another round. Well, you want a right to participate in that. Sophisticated investors will ask for that. Sophisticated angels will ask for that. Sophisticated VCs will say, no, you can't have that. We're going to take that away. Read Jason Calacanis's book. He's got a chapter about this. It's quite amusing, his approach to this whole thing as an angel. We talked about valuation caps. We talked about how unsafe safes can be. Yeah, that's the other thing. I said it's not simple. It's not an agreement. It's not equity. It's also not very safe. It's pretty risky. And as you might expect, the SEC hates these things. They've got a whole blog post on their site that, oh, don't invest in safes. They're not safe. All right. We're at the top of the hour. I apologize for only getting through 28 slides, but I did better than I thought I would. I'm going to send you the whole deck. I'm going to send you my book. I'm going to send you links to my YouTube videos where if you really want to learn this stuff, you can get a PhD in startup law watching my stuff. But let's take a few questions. Let's make this interactive. Holy cow. All right. Thank you for those of you who are telling me who you are. Explain how and why angel money is more expensive than VC money. By the way, if you have a question, post it in the Q&A because it's just hard to look at multiple modes, I guess. Well, here's what I mean by that. That might be an overgeneralization, and thank you for calling me on that. And by the way, if anybody of you here disagree with any of my opinions, weigh in. Don't worry, my feelings won't be hurt. If you want to tell me, let's get some interaction going here. So the question is, can you explain why angel money is more expensive than VC money? Here's why I say that. When I say that, it's because when your angel investor comes in, if they're a smart, sophisticated investor, they're not going to do a priced round typically at the angel level. They could, let's say we're doing a SAFE or a convertible because it's small money that's coming in. Well, if they're smart, they're going to say, I want a valuation cap. Okay, what does a valuation cap mean? It means that when you take my money and you convert it into venture capital round, you're going to convert it at no higher valuation than X. All right, let's think about that for a minute. Let's say I'm the smart investor, just to use a totally ridiculous, unworldly example. I'm a smart investor. And I put on, and say I have $100,000 to invest. So I put $100,000 in the company. And I say, I'll tell you what, I want to have a $4 million valuation cap on my $100,000. Let's make the numbers easier. This is stupid. I'm going to do it. I want a $1 million valuation cap on my $100,000. Okay, depending on whether that's pre or post, let's say that's 10% of the company. And you, the company, say, yeah, okay. Then we go do a venture capital round at $10 million. Well, think about that. You just sold me 10% of your company for $100,000. It went way too cheap because of the valuation cap. Now, why am I pausing on this other than the fact that you asked me about it? It's because I've seen this happen where we got low valuation caps on the early money and we took too much at that low cap. And all of a sudden, we've given a huge chunk of the equity of the company to angel investors. Well, why is that a problem? I'll tell you why. Because there's going to come a point, and I have seen this happen over and over again. There's a benefit to being extremely old. I've seen it happen where the later institutional investors come in and say, holy cow, you guys didn't leave enough for the founders. I'm going to take my share. We got to give those early angel investors their share when they convert. That leaves about this much for you. You're not going to stick around. You're going to leave this company. You're going to jump ship. You're going to go across the street and start over with a new one. I know that. There's not enough here to incentivize you. So that's why I say even angel money can be expensive and can be more expensive than venture capital money. I did some small measure of debt financing, did a promissory note against the company. Is this going to deter VC funds? Well, I'm smiling because it's one more thing you have to explain, but the reason I'm smiling is because you're making a fundamental assumption here that I don't think it's a great idea to make. And that fundamental assumption is that you can hardwire this, right? That you can walk in. And I've had so many people say, oh, we're going to put super voting rights in place. Yeah, I'll always be ahead of the VCs because I got my super voting rights. Yeah, you got all that stuff until you meet a VC, because they will make a pancake out of your company. They're going to tell you, this is the cap table we want. Don't really care what you've done before. This is what you're going to have at close. So that's, and it's an easy, this is just paper, guys. It's just paper. We can change all this with the stroke of a pen. So is it going to deter VC funds? I think it's one more thing that you might have to negotiate, and maybe not. Keep in mind, I mean, the general rule I have found is that VCs do not want their money going into the company, then going out, especially to the founder. I mean, you're supposed to be in there with me, skin in the game, etc. Well, every once in a while, I mean, especially these days when it's so hard to go public, and get liquidity, and we're doing a lot of secondaries, founders are taking money off the table. There's a lot more. It's a lot looser. It's a lot looser. VCs have just loosened up on whether they'll let the founders take a little bit of money out. But the conventional wisdom is that, yeah, they're going to make that note go away. They're going to make you contribute it to capital when you close your price round. But again, Your mileage might vary. You know, you might be the next big thing, and who knows? Is there a time where traction can hurt you? Possibly if the early customers are paying on a discount against your ultimate pricing strategy. Well, let me double click on that for a second. In my world, the companies I work with, I call them go big or go home companies, right? And if you're a company, if you're a lifestyle business and you make if you can have income and you're a yogurt shop down on the corner, believe it or not, I've had clients that operate yogurt shops and they make money and, they feed their families and they have something to leave to future generations. And that's awesome. That's all great. But that's not a VC financeable, fundable company. What they want is something that is not going to have a lot of income, that's going to reinvest the earnings and grow user base. So yeah, that could possibly hurt you if you're focused on income instead of growing the company. And this is all very fact specific and generalizations are risky, but that's the general idea, right? And well, I don't know. I hope I don't have any VCs in the audience. Let me put my cynical hat on here and say sometimes you'll see that happen at the expense of the company, right? Where the company maybe ought to be spending time with their customers. Instead, they're growing their user base. And I totally get it. Let's use a very public example, PayPal. Listen to Reid Hoffman's podcast on PayPal. So their product was not perfect when they launched it, and their product was not so great when they scaled it. He admits that. And, he tells the story of how if we'd have spent our time perfecting the product, we never would have had time to scale. And he tells the story how people kind of would bug him to death online with help requests. And they only had 4 founders at the time to handle all this stuff, would bug him to death about, oh, you overcharged me by $7, stuff like that. And they ignored them. They ignored their customers, just ignored them. I mean, did they teach you that in business school? Ignore your customers? That's what they did. Well, the customers, we're talking about their money. They're not, they're let's say they're highly motivated and angry. So now they find their addresses and they come down, they just get in their car and they drive from Sacramento or wherever and, go to the office and, they're banging on the doors. They want to come in, hey, messed up my transaction here. So what did they do? They closed the office, locked the doors, closed the office, went someplace else. I'm not making this up. This is on the podcast. Then they got a hold of their cell phone numbers. And now they're getting calls all the time from angry customers. So his point is that, and he calls it letting fires burn. And I talk about it in my book, right? Letting some fires burn. Can't put out every fire. He says we could not put out every one of those fires or we never would have been able to scale the company. Now, as we know, PayPal has got a great product now and they scaled and they've done well and they provide great service. But he says the early days were pretty tough because they were building the product and it wasn't perfect. They were probably even a little embarrassed by the first launch. So yeah, I think traction in that case, if you think big picture, maybe it can hurt you. Please give me a link. Okay, I will do that. I'm going to be emailing everybody. I'm not sure what link you want, but I'll send you a few. Could you post Jason's book title? The book is Angel, and it's Jason Calacanis. And I got to say, the guy is an entertaining writer. How do you compile all of your no's and apply them in the next pitch? I think what you're asking, John, is how do you take feedback? And thank you for that, because the VC meeting is an interesting dance because you're not only trying to get their money, or you are trying to get their money, but if you can't get their money, at least get their advice, right? And get their feedback. And they are going to give you feedback, and you might hate the feedback, you might disagree with it, but at least you know how an investor thinks, right? And you can incorporate that into the next presentation. And if there's something that you're doing that they hate, wouldn't you want to know that? I mean, God, I sat in one VC meeting recently we went through this whole presentation. And the investor said, and a VC, big one too. And they said, I think you might benefit from having a professional do your PowerPoint. Like, holy cow, that's your comment? That's what you're thinking about? That's what you're focused? We went through all that and that's your takeaway? Yeah, we got to fix that problem. I do not want you thinking about, my messed up graphics. I want you thinking about how we're going to save the world and all become billionaires off of this. So yeah, incorporate the feedback. My safe money evaporated. Okay, I don't see a question mark in that question. By the way, your question should end with a question mark, just a word to the wise. If you have not registered your startup as a legal entity, can you still ask for funding without getting in trouble? Why in the world would you not have a legal entity? I mean, can you still ask for funding without getting in trouble? Well, a couple of things. I don't see how you could ever close that deal. And secondly, if you don't have an entity, then that's you are out there exposed, as the seller of the promoter soliciting the sale of securities. Yikes. Nah, there's no reason these days in this environment for anybody to be doing business not as a legal entity. So why do we want a legal entity? Let me give you 3 reasons. Number one biggest reason. You would never do anything that has even the smallest amount of risk without having a corporation or an LLC between you and that risk. You want to protect yourself from potential liability. Now, it's not perfect. It's not bulletproof. But that's the number one reason. Liability protection from the business risks of the business. By the way, on that point, if you go talk to a litigator, I've heard litigators say that, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm going to sue you personally anyway. I'm going to pierce that corporate veil. I'm going to ignore all that paper. It's just paper. And we're going to get you anyway. Well, I will tell you that I've been doing this for 35 years. I have formed thousands of companies. I've seen that threat over and over again. And when it's done right, it doesn't happen. I have never once had that happen to one of my companies, not because I have such great companies, because it's a hard claim to make. You really got to have something else going on. You got to have fraud. You got to have money moving in the wrong place. You have to have a complete disregard of corporate formalities as a typical matter. It's, even though it sounds like it's an easy claim and people throw that around a lot, in my experience, it's not that easy. Now, I know litigators disagree with me, but don't sue me, please, for saying that. What was the second reason you want to have an entity is you're developing an asset, you're developing IP, you're developing intellectual property, you're entering into contracts, you're creating goodwill, creating relationships. Isn't it great to have a vehicle to just park all that inside? That's what you want to do. You want to have a vehicle to hold that asset. So you got something to go out and invest. And the third thing is if you've got co-founders, advisors, service providers, helpers, consultants, whatever, whoever you're going to give equity to for their part in this. And yes, it's harder to do under our current SEC, but it still is done. Silicon Valley was built on that. We were built on equity comp, in my opinion. Well, you need an entity to do that. You really do. Now, I've had one time in my career, we put together, well, twice, a business trust. It was novel. It was fun. We got to work with all these interesting intellectual, arguments about it. Many times people have used LLCs, sometimes S Corps, if I can't talk them out of it, but almost always that's a Delaware C corporation. And we have tons of content on why that is. Let's see here. Thanks for the question, though. At seed stage, are the deals from larger and more reputable VCs simpler and more founder-friendly? I don't think you're going to get large VCs at seed stage. By definition, it's just VC economics. And I cover that in the slides that I didn't get to. But VC economics, just think, I mean, a big fund has to make big bets. Now, I know that a lot of them now are doing like small bets just to get the follow on, but that's the whole reason. I mean, you got to move the needle. They have to move the needle with an investment. And that for a large VC is not a seed stage. As a sole proprietorship, can I still ask for funding as long as I don't accept any real money until we register as a legal entity? Yeah, you want to go test the waters. That's what you want to do. That's what we call that. So that's a delicate dance, because what we want to avoid is and I'm going to tell you how to do that, but what you want to avoid is soliciting the sale of a security. Okay, that's when you start to get into regulatory land. And what you absolutely positively have to avoid is a public solicitation of the sale of a security, because now, you're really on the radar. Well, God, how do all these companies with their pitch decks, how do they do it? Well, the way they do it is to not sell securities, right? Go look at, well-advised pitch competitions. Companies are out there saying, hey, they're not even pitch competitions anymore. They're product demonstrations. This is what I'm doing. This is my product, etc. Now, you can have a conversation with a handful of people that you have a pre-existing relationship with about, hey, if I were to incorporate this, is this the kind of thing you would be interested in investing in? Because you don't have anything to sell. I mean, that's my opinion. At that point, you're not really soliciting anything. But you got to be careful. You can't, and I know a lot of people, you don't want to go too far down that path without having this buttoned up. And I know it's hard to believe until you read it in a complaint, but stuff does happen. What is the larger VC mindset? Technology risk versus market risk. It seems VCs are less able to take technology risk, but more able to take market risk, since they understand the market more and can help companies overcome market risk, right? Oh, let me read this. I'm not sure I follow you. Technology risk, market risk. Less able to take technology, more able to take market risk. Well, it depends on the VC, right? And I do have a slide on that too, of course. But some are quants, they just look at the numbers. Some are technology, they invest in certain technologies. You're going to see that in the AI space a lot, I think. It's, I heard this question posed to the elder Draper once, and Draper, a very well-known venture capital investing family here in Silicon Valley, and almost that same question. It was about 10 years ago on a panel, and he said, I loved his answer. And he said, well, if you ask my partner Jurvetson over there, he'd tell you that it's all about the technology. He's really into technology. You ask me, I'm going to tell you it's about the people. Somebody else, maybe they'd say it's about the market. So the answer is it depends. Different VCs have a different focus. It's a good idea if you're going that route to understand who you're investing with, right? It's a good idea to know who your audience is. It's a good idea to know if the investor across the table from you is going to be more focused on the fact that you've got the best mousetrap ever made, or if they're more focused on you've got, a team from Wharton behind you or whatever. So I think it depends. Personally, I think it's really nice to have a VC that understands the market, because unfortunately, I've been in these meetings and I've been in these deals, and I've been to that first board meeting after the deal closes when a VC has invested in a market they don't really understand. I do a lot of work in agriculture technology, and there was a time, it was one of those FOMO things, when I saw a lot of VCs jumping into the space without really understanding it. And some of the meetings were almost comical. It's not funny anytime somebody loses money, but it's like, how could you not think to ask that question until now? Well, it's FOMO. They didn't really understand the market. And since we got time, let me just tell you, what do I mean by that? Well, in that particular vertical, what we find is there's a long time to exit. Agriculture is a slow business. The tech companies that service them, similarly have to face that hurdle. So it's a slower time to exit. All right. Well, be nice the investor had the same expectation as everybody else and knew that going into it. So that's my view. But that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. Keep that in mind. Let's see. I have a 3-year-old startup. We invested a lot of money. We're already in the stores. Congratulations. And by we, I'm assuming you mean the founders. We have lots of downloads, no sales yet. Can we get a VC when there's no income? Well, thank you for pausing on this because I think what you're asking me is what is the definition of traction? And again, let's go back to my ag example since I'm on that. Because I saw this a lot where companies would say, I got traction. I got all these farmers using my app or whatever. Well, okay. Some VC would say, that's great. You know, what do I write the check to? Actually, nobody would say that, but let's assume they would. But the smart VCs, they would say, oh, okay. Are they paying you for this? You know? So be careful about that because, you know, when I say traction, yeah, that's good that people will download it. That's great. Maybe you got the freemium model and that's great. Boy, if you can get people to pay you for it, that's way more powerful because ultimately, you know, they are trying to make money at this. Let's not forget that. So that implies that your customers are going to have to pay you. I know this sounds simple and axiomatic and why am I listening to this? But I think it's worth thinking a little about because it's part of that. Yes, you want to get into the market with your freemium model, but at some point, I think you need to show that people are going to pay you for this stuff. Is it ever appropriate for founders to be drawing a salary? Well, so a couple of things. Before you get an investment, I don't know where you have the money to pay a salary. I mean, if you do, then yeah, in fact, the tax code is going to insist on that, even though people ignore that provision pretty widely. Post-investment, you should be drawing a salary. It's going to be less than market. So you don't bother bringing all your slides in about what public company CEOs get paid. I've seen people do that. That is a bad idea. Bad idea. You're not going to make any friends in the investment community advocating for that because you're in a startup world. You have equity. That's your salary is that big equity chunk you got. So don't plan on getting a market salary, but you will negotiate. Or, I mean, you got to live, right? You got to eat. You can't eat stock, at least not the kind that you sell, you know, in your company. So, yeah, it is appropriate post-investment, you know, but make sure, you know, where it gets tricky is when we, like VCs, we're going to specify what your employment is. You know, VCs are sophisticated. You know, we're not going to overlook that little detail. But angels will, right? They're going to write you a safe. And then the company is going to use the safe proceeds and they're going to pay themselves a salary. Is that okay? I would say yes, provided you are reasonable about that and you didn't lie about it to anybody. And but there comes a point when that salary gets to be a little high. And then the angel says, wait a minute, that's material. You should have told me that. Or you give yourself a raise after the investment. It's like, hold on now. You didn't tell me you were going to do that. So be careful about that. You know, the worst, I think, a bad place to be in the law is on the other side of an unhappy investor. And I can introduce you to a lot of people that will attest to that. What are well-advised pitch competitions? Here's what I mean by that. We've gotten, this is one of those that's Hollywood kind of things. We've all gotten sort of used to people getting up on stages in front of the public and, you know, pushing, and that's fine. That's cool. Do it if you can. But as a lawyer, I get a little concerned about selling securities or soliciting the sale of securities in a public forum for a company that, you know, is relying on a securities law exemption that says you can only sell privately. That's a problem. So how do we deal with that? Well, number one, I'd rather see a product demonstration than a pitch if it's public. Or number two, I'd like to see that competition closed to the public, right? So it's just a group of people. Number three, in an ideal world, that group of people would all be accredited investors, all right? And four, they'd all be sophisticated investors. That's a little bit different. Here in California, believe it or not, we have a different definition of sophisticated. It includes accredited, by the way. So, So, and then finally, I have disclaimers all over slides. It's like, look, forward-looking statements. And then finally, after my finally, for God's sakes, don't ask for money. I see companies, almost all of them, they get to the end and it's like, and if you want to buy stock, I'm selling, X% at Y dollars a share, and you should call me here, and this is what you're going to get. Don't do that. Don't do it. First of all, it's not going to help. We all know why you're there. Secondly, it's, what you say can and will be used against you. So I wouldn't do that. I would just do the product demonstration. And I would try to limit the audience that it's in front of, and keep in mind, put it in front of people that are actually going to be your audience for investing in you. If you really want to go out to the public with this stuff, there are legitimate channels for doing that. Crowdfunding, right? You can go out on a portal, a crowdfunding site. If you're willing to go up to all right. So Reg CF crowdfunding, that's anybody, accredited or not. Does everyone know what I mean by accredited? 80 years ago, it meant a rich person. So it's more than $1 million of net worth excluding residents, or more than $200,000 a year of income, 300,000 jointly. All right, so you can go on a Reg CF crowdfunding portal, and there are a lot of good ones out there and some bad ones. And on that portal, you can take money from people who are not accredited, right? Just the general public in essence. Now they're limited in how much they can invest, but you can take that money. Or you can go on an accredited only portal, something like AngelList, where you're taking money from accredited investors. It's much easier because unless you're doing the Reg CF, and even if you are, you have to provide some information. But if you're doing an accredited only, then the information and disclosure requirements are much less. That's why we do it that way. And pausing on that, the deals I do, especially now, are accredited only. That's what I want to do. Unless it's a Reg CF deal on a portal where somebody else is going to pay attention to that sort of compliance, I really want my startup companies to be taking money only from accredited investors. Let's just, save us all the headache and the hassle of having unaccredited investors. Because if you go over a certain amount or a certain number, then you got to provide, lots and lots of information. And that's not the worst part. The worst part is now you have them on your cap table. So if you have a later acquirer come along, well, they have to deal with it. And it's getting kind of far down the road and a little abstract, I understand, but it can be a problem for you down the road in later rounds, later financings, later sales of the company. All right. What else we got here? I'm going to take one more question here. All right. Do you have recommendations for founders with Gen AI based ideas that are unique and have no team? Should we build the MVP, that's minimum viable product, I assume? It's either that or most valuable player, and convince angels, or build the team product, test the waters before we get to investors? AI is hyper growth. Yeah, you are sidebar, only accredited investors unless you do, not necessarily. You can take unaccredited and a financing that's not on a CF, but it's harder. Let me just put it that way. Okay, back to the Gen AI question. Yeah, so I saw a bunch of Gen AI companies last year like everybody else, and this is not legal advice. Well, really none of this is. It's all just kind of my opinions about the market. But what I found, what I discovered from talking to a lot of these companies is that the market was changing so quickly, because a bunch of legal AI companies came and contacted me and say, hey, what do you think about this? Would you use this, etc.? And by the time they formulated the strategy, somebody else is in the market with the same product. It's moving that quickly. So your question is not necessarily specific to Gen AI. It's just what we're all thinking about right now, that we see really great ideas that you have to execute quickly. That's why you're taking the angel money. So should we build the MVP and convince angels to build a team? Yeah, I think so. I think you follow personally, I think you follow the lean startup method. And you do the Reid Hoffman thing, you get your product out there as quickly as it can, even though you might be a little embarrassed by the first release. Um, and iterate with the market, get good market feedback. Now, keep in mind that I'm not a business advisor. I'm just a lawyer, but this is what I have seen in the Valley over the last 30 years. And this is what I'm seeing in AI lately. I'm seeing companies that are done before they start. Analysis paralysis. They just wait too long, and now there's no way you're going to catch up. We want to move fast and break things, as Zuckerman says here in the Valley. So that's what I would recommend you do. All right, that's it, friends. We're at 10:30. Thanks you very much. I'm Roger Royce Haynes Boone. I'm a partner. I do emerging growth and venture capital in Palo Alto. I'm going to be following up with all of you with an email with my book. You'll get another email from my site, 10,000 Startups. Unsubscribe if you want, won't hurt my feelings, but you'll make me feel a lot better if you don't. All righty, thank you. See you next time.